We like to think we know our family tree. You have parents, grandparents, great-grandparents. The line goes back and back. You can trace it through records, through stories, through old photos. And with modern DNA tests, you can trace it even further, connecting to cousins you never knew you had, seeing maps of where your ancestors lived hundreds of years ago. It feels solid, it feels known, but what if some of your ancestors are missing? Not just missing from the family Bible or census records. I mean missing from the fossil record. Or missing from history entirely. What if a part of your genetic code comes from a group of people we have no name for, no bones of, no idea what they looked like? What if they are ghosts? In genetics, this is a real idea. It's called a ghost population. A ghost population is an ancient group of hominins whose existence we can infer from the DNA of modern people, but for whom we have no physical remains. They are a statistical shadow in our genomes. We see their faint outline in our genetic code, a contribution from a source we can't otherwise identify. It's like finding a recipe in your grandmother's kitchen with a mystery ingredient listed. You can taste it in the final dish, you know it's there, but you have no idea what it is or where it came from. For a long time, the human family tree looked simple. It was a neat branching diagram you'd see in a textbook. One species evolved into the next in a clean line. Our species, Homo sapiens, was at the very top, the end product. Everyone else was a dead-end branch, an evolutionary failure. Neanderthals were brutish cousins who died out. Homo erectus was a more primitive ancestor we left behind. We thought we were pure. We thought our success came from replacing everyone else. Then, about a decade ago, we learned to read ancient DNA. And that simple tree came crashing down. The first big shock was the Neanderthal genome. Scientists finally managed to piece together the genetic code from Neanderthal bones. And when they compared it to the DNA of people living today, they found something stunning. Almost everyone whose ancestors came from outside of Africa has Neanderthal DNA. Not a lot, maybe 1 to 2%. But it's there. This wasn't a mistake. It was a clear signal. The only way their DNA could have gotten into ours is if, at some point long ago, our Homo sapiens ancestors met Neanderthals and had children with them. This wasn't a story of simple replacement, it was a story of mixing. Our species didn't just push them aside. We merged with them. That small percentage of Neanderthal DNA has had real effects. It's linked to our immune systems, our skin, our hair, even our susceptibility to certain diseases. The Neanderthals aren't entirely gone. A little piece of them lives on in billions of people. That discovery opened the floodgates. If we mixed with Neanderthals, who else did we mix with? The next ghost story came from a tiny bone found in a cave in Siberia. It was a piece of a finger from a young girl who lived over 50,000 years ago. There wasn't enough of it to tell what kind of hominin she was. She could have been a Neanderthal. She could have been a modern human, but when scientists sequenced the DNA from that tiny bone, they found it belonged to a completely new group. They were related to Neanderthals, a sister group, but they were genetically distinct. They were a whole new branch of the human family we never knew existed. Scientists named them the Denisovans after the cave where the bone was found. For a while, the Denisovans were true ghosts. They existed almost entirely as a sequence of genetic code. We had their DNA, but no idea what they looked like. Then researchers compared the Denisovan genome to modern humans. And they found their DNA too, but the pattern was different. It wasn't spread all over the world like Neanderthal DNA. It was concentrated in people from Melanesia in places like Papua New Guinea and Australia. Some of these populations have up to 5% Denisovan DNA. It's a huge contribution. Later, it was found that Denisovan DNA is also present in people across East and South Asia. One specific Denisovan gene, it turns out, helps modern Tibetans live at high altitudes. A gift from an ancient cousin we only recently discovered. The Denisovans showed us that our past was even more complex than we imagined. There wasn't just one other group living alongside our ancestors, there were at least two. The world of the late Pleistocene was a lot like a Tolkien novel. It wasn't just humans. There were different kinds of people interacting, competing, and sometimes interbreeding. Neanderthals and Denisovans were the first proof that our family tree wasn't a tree at all. It was more like a braided river or a tangled web. Streams of ancestry flowed apart, then came back together again. But they weren't the true ghosts. We have their bones, we have their DNA, we can point to them. The real mystery, the question that drives scientists today, is about the ghosts we can't see. The ones we only know from the strange patterns they left in our own genes. Are there more of them? The answer, it seems, is yes, and the most compelling evidence comes from Africa. For a long time, the story of interbreeding was focused on what happened after Homo sapiens left Africa. The meetings with Neanderthals and Denisovans happened in Eurasia. The common wisdom was that modern African populations were poor Homo sapiens because those other hominins didn't live in Africa at the time. This was a simple, clean story. And it was wrong. Scientists started noticing strange things when they looked closely at the DNA of people from across Africa. Africa has more human genetic diversity than the rest of the world combined. This makes sense. It's where our species originated and has lived the longest. Within that vast diversity, researchers found sections of DNA that looked old. Really old. Here's how they figured it out. Imagine the human family tree again. The branch that led to Homo sapiens split from the branch that led to Neanderthals and Denisovans about 600,000 years ago. Any genetic variation that arose after that split should look relatively modern. But researchers kept finding chunks of DNA, especially in certain West African populations, that looked much older than that. They were so different from the surrounding DNA that they seemed to predate the origin of our species. What could explain this? One possibility is that our species was just incredibly diverse from the very beginning, and these ancient-looking genes were simply preserved in some populations by chance. But when scientists built computer models to test these ideas, that explanation didn't fit the data very well. The models kept struggling to explain these ancient blocks of DNA, so they tried a different model. What if the ancestors of modern Africans didn't just evolve in isolation? What if long ago they met and interbred with an even more ancient, archaic hominin group that was still living in Africa? A group that had split from our lineage a million years ago or more. When they added this ghost population to the model, everything clicked. The math worked. The presence of these super old DNA snippets made perfect sense if they were introduced into the Homo sapiens gene pool through interbreeding. The model suggested that between 2 and 19% of the ancestry of some modern West Africans could come from this unknown archaic source. This was a bombshell. Deep in the DNA of people living today is the genetic echo of a lost human group. A group for which we have no name and no fossils. Who were they? We don't know for sure. Africa was home to many different hominins over the past million years. There was Homo heidelbergensis, a possible direct ancestor of ours and Neanderthals. There was Homo naledi, a small-brained hominin with a strange mix of ancient and modern features discovered recently in South Africa. There could even have been late surviving populations of Homo erectus. Any of them could be the source. But we can't be sure, because we don't have DNA from their fossils. DNA breaks down quickly, especially in warm climates like Africa's. So, for now, they remain ghosts. We can see the effect they had on us, but we can't see them directly. We know they were there because a part of them is still inside us. This discovery changes our understanding of our own origins. The cradle of humankind in Africa wasn't a simple nursery where one species grew up and then left. It was a complex, dynamic place where our direct ancestors lived alongside other different types of humans for hundreds of thousands of years. And they weren't always separate. They were interacting. They were mixing. The story of human evolution in Africa is just as messy and tangled as the story outside of it. Maybe even more so. And the story doesn't stop there. The ghosts aren't just in Africa. They seem to be everywhere. Remember the Denisovans, the mystery group from the Siberian cave? Their DNA gave us another, even deeper ghost story. When scientists were analyzing the high-quality Denisovan genome, they found something mind-boggling. The Denisovans themselves had interbred with another, even more ancient group. It was a ghost within a ghost. Inside the Denisovan DNA was a small percentage of genetic material from a super archaic hominin. This wasn't Neanderthal, it wasn't Homo sapiens, it was something else entirely. Something that had split from our family tree about 1 million, maybe even 2 million years ago. This was an echo from the dawn of the genus Homo. The best candidate for this super archaic ghost is Homo erectus. Homo erectus was an incredibly successful and long-lived species. They were the first hominins to leave Africa in a major way, spreading all across Asia. They lived there for over 1 million years. It's entirely plausible that when the ancestors of the Denisovans moved into Asia, they encountered late surviving populations of Homo erectus and interbred with them. We have fossils of Homo erectus from all over Asia. The problem, again, is DNA. We've never been able to get any from them, so we can't make a direct match. The super archaic hominin remains a ghost, its identity inferred from the faint traces it left in the DNA of another extinct human group. Think about what this means. Our ancestors, Homo sapiens, interbred with Neanderthals and Denisovans. And the Denisovans, in turn, had interbred with an even older group, possibly Homo erectus. This makes our genetic history a dizzying series of encounters between different worlds. It's like a set of Russian nesting dolls, with one story of interbreeding tucked inside another. The clean, simple tree is gone forever. Our genome is a patchwork quilt stitched together from threads of multiple ancient lineages, some of which we are only just beginning to identify. So, how do scientists actually find these ghosts? It's not like there's a section of our DNA labeled mystery hominin. The process is clever, and it relies on powerful computers and sophisticated statistics. It starts with large databases of human genomes from diverse populations around the world. Scientists also have the high-quality genomes of our known archaic relatives, Neanderthals and Denisovans. They line all this genetic code up and compare it. They are looking for patterns. Specifically, they are looking for chunks of DNA called haplotypes that look out of place. Imagine you have three friends, Alice, Bob, and Carol. You know that Bob and Carol are siblings, and Alice is their cousin. You would expect Bob and Carol's DNA to be very similar to each other, and both would be a bit less similar to Alice's. Now, imagine you find a big chunk of DNA in Bob's genome that doesn't look like Carol's at all. And it looks even less like Alice's. In fact, it's so different it looks like it came from a distant unknown relative you've never heard of. That's a potential sign of a ghost. The computer models do something similar, but on a massive scale. They build family trees based on the genetic data. They calculate how long ago different populations split from each other based on the number of genetic mutations that have accumulated. And then they scan the genomes, looking for sections that don't fit the tree. A chunk of DNA in a modern African genome, for example, might have so many unique mutations that the model calculates it must have split from the main human line a million years ago. But it's sitting right there in a person living today. It hasn't been evolving on its own for a million years. It was reintroduced. The most plausible explanation is that it came from an archaic population that had been evolving separately for that long, and then mixed back in with the ancestors of modern humans tens of thousands of years ago. The scientists run simulations, they create a null hypothesis, a world with no ghost populations, where all our DNA comes from a single ancestral Homo sapiens group. Then they see if the real data fits that world. It doesn't. The weird, ancient chunks of DNA can't be explained. Then they add a new variable to the simulation, an unknown archaic group that interbreeds with our ancestors at a certain time. They can tweak the variables when the interbreeding happened, how big the ghost population was, how much they contributed. They run thousands of simulations until they find a scenario that produces the exact patterns we see in people's DNA today. It's a process of elimination. It's like an astronomer discovering a new planet, not by seeing it, but by observing a wobble in the orbit of a known planet. The wobble is the effect. The ghost planet is the cause. The ancient DNA segments are the wobble in our genome. The ghost population is the unseen cause. Of course, it's not foolproof. There could be other, more complex explanations for these patterns that we haven't thought of yet. Maybe ancient human populations were structured in very strange ways, but right now, introgression from ghost populations is the simplest and most powerful explanation for what we see in the data. As we get more and more DNA from people all over the world, the evidence for these ghosts only seems to get stronger. So what does all this mean for us? Like for how we see ourselves? First, it profoundly changes our picture of the past. The world our ancestors inhabited wasn't empty. It was filled with other kinds of humans. For most of our species' history, we were not alone, and we didn't just live side by side. We were part of a larger, interconnected web of hominin populations. The idea of a single, linear march of progress from primitive ape to modern man is completely dead. The reality was a messy dynamic and fascinating interchange of genes and cultures. Second, it redefines what it means to be human. We are, by our very nature, a hybrid species. A mutt. There is no such thing as a pure human. Everyone is a mix. The Neanderthal in a European's DNA, the Denisovan in a Papuan's, the unknown archaic ghost in a Yoruba person's, these aren't abnormalities. They are a fundamental part of our story. Our species' success didn't come from being pure. It may have come from our very ability to mix. This interbreeding probably wasn't just a random accident. It may have been a key to our survival. When our ancestors moved into new environments, they met archaic people who had already been living there for hundreds of thousands of years. Those people were already adapted to the local climate, the local foods, the local diseases. By interbreeding with them, our ancestors could pick up useful genes off the shelf. It was an evolutionary shortcut. We already know this is true for Neanderthal and Denisovan genes. Genens for immunity, for dealing with UV radiation, for fat metabolism, and for high-altitude survival were all gifts from our archaic cousins. It's almost certain that the ghost populations gave us similar advantages. The genes from the African ghost population, for example, might have helped our ancestors fight off diseases unique to that continent. We are still at the very beginning of figuring out what these ghost genes do. Third, this work recenters Africa in the human story. It shows that Africa was not just a static starting point that our ancestors left behind. It was a hotbed of hominin evolution and interaction for millennia. The deepest and most complex parts of our evolutionary story may have played out there, with ghost populations we are only now starting to glimpse. The search for these ghost populations is one of the most exciting frontiers in science. It's like a new kind of archaeology, but instead of digging in the dirt for bones and tools, we are digging into our own DNA. Our genomes are living fossils. They contain a record of our deep past, with chapters we never knew were there. So what's next? How do we turn these ghosts into flesh and bone? The ultimate goal is to find a direct match. To find an ancient fossil, get DNA from it, and discover that it matches the genetic profile of one of our ghost populations. This is incredibly difficult. As mentioned, DNA degrades. Getting it from a 100,000-year-old fossil in a cold Siberian cave is one thing. Getting it from a 500,000-year-old fossil in the heat of Africa is another challenge entirely. But technology is improving. Scientists are developing new techniques to extract and read tiny, damaged fragments of ancient DNA. They are also learning to get DNA not just from bones, but from the dirt on cave floors. This environmental DNA can tell us which animals and which hominins lived in a place, even if their bones are gone. Maybe we'll find the DNA of a ghost population in ancient cave sediment. Another promising field is ancient proteomics. Proteins, the molecules that DNA codes for, can sometimes survive for much longer than DNA itself. By analyzing the proteins in a fossil like collagen in bone, scientists can get clues about its genetic makeup. It's not as good as a full genome, but it can be enough to place a fossil on the family tree and see if it might be one of our ghosts. And as always, the computer models will get better. As we sequence the DNA of more and more people from every corner of the globe, we will have a higher resolution map of human genetic diversity. This will allow us to spot the faint signals of ghost populations with greater confidence, and to learn more about them when they lived, when they mixed with our ancestors, and what their DNA might have done for us. We are living in a revolutionary time for understanding our own origins. Every new genome sequenced, every new statistical method developed is like a new lens for peering into the past. What we are seeing is a human story that is far richer, far more complex, and far stranger than we ever believed. Our DNA is not just a blueprint for building a body, it's an archive, it's a library of our ancestors' lives. And some of the books in that library are written in languages we are only just learning to read. They tell the stories of peoples we have forgotten, peoples who have no other record of their existence. They are the ghosts in our blood. They are not scary, they are family, and they are a powerful reminder that we are all connected, not just to each other today, but to a whole world of ancient peoples who contributed to the strange, resilient, and beautiful patchwork that is humanity. The search for them is, in the end, a search for ourselves.